Hey, what's up everyone? Today I wanted to make a video which is basically a bunch of tips just to get better at One Piece. I've been playing for a little bit more than 6 months now, and I finally got to the point where I'm basically going 3-1 or 4-0 at locals most weeks. I usually don't drop more than one game at this point, and there are a bunch of general rules that I've picked up along these 6 months that have really helped me and taught me that a lot of people don't really know, or that they don't come super obvious, but once you know them, it becomes very obvious afterwards, like swinging 2k over whatever you're trying to KO, for example. But I'm gonna go through the list now. So number one, as I just stated, is swinging 2k over anything that you're trying to remove. This will force two cards out of your opponent's hands, which is really good, and they're much less likely to, give up the cards for the character depending on how good of a character it is. Number two would be don't burn your hand, especially over something that could be KO'd anyway. Let's say they're swinging 7 at your rested Zoro and you can save him. Maybe you can even save him twice. But if you can't save him 3 times and they have 3 swings, there's no point of protecting him. It's much better to just let him go than lose this sort of tempo and resource game by countering out a bunch. Now obviously you're going to get baited, especially by decks like Sakazuki, for example, but try not to as much as possible. Cards in your hand are a very big resource, and the less cards in your hand, the more confident your opponent is in doing absolutely anything. Number 3 would be life is a resource. Don't just be countering out because you can, especially towards the beginning of the game. I wanted to do that a lot. I'm like, no, I don't want to give up one of my lives already. Like, why would I not just fight for my life, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, life is a resource, and it could even be a good trigger depending on what deck you're playing. If you don't have a certain card in your hand, it could give you that. It could just open up the doors to a lot of different areas. So yeah, life is a resource. Treat it that way rather than something that you're like sitting on a dragon's hoard trying to protect. Number 4 would be board presence. You need board presence to win the game. That's how basically any game is won. That's why Sakazuki and Gecko Moria are so powerful right now. Sakazuki can just basically remove anything you have on the field constantly, so they're always going to have the board presence advantage. And the only real counter to that is Rush, cards that can just immediately get effect off of being played. So yeah, you need board presence. I'll go through more in-depth versions of all these later, but board presence. Number 5 is read your cards / understand your deck. This might be a pretty obvious one, but you don't know how many sim players I see that are putting 3 cards in the trash, or Katakuri players that don't know that 8 cost Katakuri can only bottom deck or top deck an 8 cost. Someone tried to do that to my 10 cost Kuzan at locals the other day, and I was like, that's not what the card says. So yeah, read your cards, understand your deck. Obviously, you're going to misplay at some points. It happens to everybody. I made multiple misplays my last game at locals last week because I was just so mentally drained. Read your cards. Use their effects properly. Number 6 would be play to your outs. If you know that you're not going to get another turn, for example, try to win now. There is not going to be another chance for you to win, so even if your best chance is attaching 5 Dawn to a character with 0 power and swinging for 5, even if they have 10 cards in their hand, you don't know. They could all be non-counters. Like, it's happened before. I've won a game swinging 5 at life when they have 6 cards in their hand, and they just didn't have it. So, play to your outs. No matter how unlikely it is, if you're going to lose regardless, just go for it. You know what I mean? Number 7 would be don't kill your momentum. So if you're starting to get board presence and you're starting to feel a little bit more confident, don't slow yourself down by playing a blocker, because it's not like a blocker is going to elevate you to such a higher level by protecting your other characters, because they can still be KO'd or rested or whatever the case may be at the end of the day. So play your momentum. If you want to play the curve, basically, like if you're playing 1, 3, 5, 7, don't just stop it in the middle to play 2 blockers or something. Like, I see so many players, yellow players specifically, if you play like Brûlé on 3 Dawn turn, I know I won the game already, basically. Like, that's such a disadvantage. That is basically a nothing on the board. Like, blocking 1 attack is not worth losing a 5k body that could swing again and again and again, for example, like Perospero. So that's just what makes stuff like Perospero so good, is because not only is it really good pressure early game, but it also lets you search a card when it dies. So yeah. Number 8 would be learn the yellow matchup. Now, everybody is going to complain about yellow at one point or another. Everybody's going to lose to a yellow trigger at one point or another. It is unavoidable, but there are things that you can do and precautions that you can make to avoid running into a Beji with your full forehead down, for example. So, I'll touch on that later. But yeah, just learn the yellow matchup. I'll go in more in-depth in the in-depth explanation part of the video. Number 9 will be sequencing. Sequencing is super important and probably the most important thing in the entire game, I would argue. You don't want to be playing characters before swinging. Let's say you play a 5-cost character down, now you swing 5 at life, they trigger Thunderbolt, now your 5-cost character is dead for absolutely no reason. And now if you're a newer player, you might say, wow, that's so lucky that they got the Thunderbolt, but an older player would say, no, you just didn't play around it. You easily could have played around the Thunderbolt. Now, that being said, there are going to be scenarios where you just cannot play around every single trigger, and you shouldn't get super gun-shy in swinging into them, because at some point you're going to have to swing into them, and if you make a certain point of not doing it over and over and over again, unless you're going for some sort of starving tactic or stall tactic, like playing Rebecca or Black Yellow Big Mom, something like that, it's not going to be good. Like, you do need to keep the pressure on them and swing at them occasionally. If they hit 5 triggers out of their life over and over and over again, you just weren't meant to win that game, and that just sucks. That's part of playing against yellow. It is what it is. If you hate it that much, you should just play yellow. So, number 10 is going to be deck building. None of this advice really matters if your deck sucks in the first place. My best advice would be copy a top player's deck to start off with, and then change it and tailor it to your needs and your locals. So, for example, maybe copy the number 1 Enel's deck list, but then change it a little bit for your locals. Don't just copy and paste somebody's deck list and expect it to work for you, because they probably have very specific intentions with different cards that you probably may not know. So copy and pasting a deck list is good. It's a very good start off with type of thing, but don't make a habit of doing it over and over again and not changing anything, because in my opinion, a deck list is much stronger when you have your personal influence and your personal playstyle behind it. So yeah, that is going to be the basic top 10 tips. If you just wanted to stick around for that part of the video and not hear the in-depth explanation, you can leave now. And now I'm going to go back from the top and start the little bit more in-depth with all of them. Okay, this first one is pretty straightforward, but swinging 2k power over whatever you're trying to kill. So if you're trying to kill an 8/8, for example, like I think Katakuri is, he has 8,000 power, so you want to swing at him with 10. That way your opponent has to discard at least 2 cards to save him, and they've got to do at least 3 if they don't have a 2k counter. So that's really, really, really strong. 3 cards out of your opponent's hand is insane, so they're probably going to go ahead and let it go if they don't have a 2k plus a 1k. So yeah, very basic one there. It's basically just diminishing your opponent's resources more efficiently. Now, if you wanted to waste your opponent's cards, you could swing at face value or +1. That would either make them waste a 2k or 2 cards, or just 1 card if you just want to start getting resources out of their hand a little bit. That is also a good option. For example, if you just wanted to sort of bait somebody, let's say they have Arrested Zoro, you just swing 5 at it 1, 2, 3 times. Now they've gotten rid of 3 cards, they'll probably pitch 1 card for it, no problem. But now you've got a card that can KO the Zoro. So now they've wasted 3 cards for something that just got KO'd effectively anyways, so didn't really matter in the end for them. So a little bit of a different approach to it that you can go with as well. You can either use it to try and certainly get rid of the characters, or try it to bait them out of cards in their hand. Either way, the choice is yours. Okay, so this next one is going to be a little bit more information on don't burn your hand. Now, a little bit with what I was talking about with the swing 2k over thing. If they're just trying to swing 1k over at you over and over again, they're probably baiting you to waste your 2ks or cards out of your hand. Like, if you know they're sitting on Gadatsu or something that could KO your character that you're trying to protect anyways, or Thunderbolt or things such as, just let it go. Even if they're bluffing you a little bit, it is most of the time worth it to keep the cards in your hand rather than the what if they don't, because in my experience, the what if they don't have it almost never happens. People don't typically bluff a lot in this game. There's not a ton to gain from it. More oftentimes than not, it is usually more of a last resort than anything. So yeah. Alright, going into number 3, life is a resource. Yellow players know this better than anyone. You know what, let me just go ahead and pull up. Let's go with Enel. So the average, this is like the pretty average Enel deck, I would say, maybe with 1 or 2 cards missing. Let's see, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 triggers. Yeah, 7 different cards that are triggers. That's going to be anywhere from, what, multiply that by 4, that's 28. Potentially 28 triggers. There's not that many, but you see the point. There's almost half a deck of triggers in yellow, potentially. So, yellow knows this more than anyone. Your life is a resource. If you need a card that you're not seeing in your hand, like if you're playing red, purple, Luffy, and you really need the gear 5, take a life. It's almost always in there. Like, if you played red, green, law, your Bonnies and your laws are somehow always in your life. Like, it's just what happens. Your good cards are more oftentimes in your life. If you're not finding them. Obviously take that with a grain of salt and don't just start ripping through your life trying to find the specific card you need, but yeah, life is not the end-all be-all, especially if you're yellow. You can manipulate it a little bit more. If you're other colors, you don't really need to worry about it. If you have a safe board, you don't need to worry about your life at all. For example, if you have 8 cost kid on the board, they can only attack 8 cost kid. So you don't really need any lives for that matter. As long as you can protect him, you don't need a single life. You can take every single one time after time after time. For example, with Rosinante, I'll go to 0 life very fast because I know I'm going to have plenty of blockers and defense out in the late game, and that will even help me with my hand size in the early game. So it works really, really well for some decks more than others. But yeah, life is a resource. Don't be afraid to take it, especially early, very early game. You should more oftentimes than not be taking the first swing at you, depending on what deck you're playing. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Okay, so this one's going to be board presence. Board presence is ultimately what wins you the game in 90% of games, I would say. Maybe unless you have like Rush or 10 cost Big Mom comes down and then they just swing at you with another Big Mom or something like that. Generally, board presence is going to win you the game, and the more you can keep it, the better you're off. You would generally want to use your counters to protect your characters much more than your life, unless you're going to lose, obviously. Because your characters can swing over and over again, and even just having a 6k character like Zoro is big, because now they've got to swing 8 at him if they really want to reliably get him off the field, and that's a lot of investment. Now let's go to something like 8k. Kid is such a good card because it's an 8k that they need to swing into multiple times. They have to remove this card in order for you to win. So Kid is a really big example of a big win condition board presence card, because once he's on the board, like, you're done. Let's look at another one. Big Mom and the homies. If they get Hera and one of the other homies and a Big Mom on the board, they're just gonna restand a Big Mom multiple times and you're done. So a lot of the times when I'm playing this deck, I won't even rest my homies or use them for anything until I'm completely set up. Like, if I'm playing a deck that doesn't KO much, I'm just going to play homie after homie after homie, set up my board, have the Big Mom, and then I'm going to triple or double swing them with a 10 drop, and it's over. So another example of how board presence can be maintained, a lot of people sometimes won't even swing with their characters, like Enel. There's a few Starvation versions of Enel where they won't swing at you at all, because it makes Gedatsu and Yamato more effective, but also it prevents their characters from being rested, which means they aren't exposed ever. And if their characters aren't exposed, you're going to have to go out of your way to KO them with effects, and if you have to KO them with effects, then you're probably not playing to your proper curve, etc. So board presence is ultimately what wins you the game. Most of the time, I don't really know how to explain it a much better way than that, but protect your characters more than your life. Your board matters more than your life, 99% of the time. Okay, so now we're going to go over reading your cards and understanding your deck. Now, this is a pretty obvious tip that I feel like I shouldn't really have to say, but it happens in every card game. People just don't read their cards, and they either assume what they do, or they try to do them without activating the cost, or whatever the case is. So let me help you guys out here. This bolded text at the top of Lucci, where it says you may place 3 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order, that is a cost. You must pay the cost to activate the effect. So this is the same thing with cards like Sanji trigger. you must discard a card to play the Sanji. Let me give you another example. Yamato. Yamato is a little bit different, but she says then. So the first part of Yamato's effect does not have anything to do with the second part. So it says KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost is equal or less than the total life you and your opponent have. Then, if you have one or less life, add one card from the top of your deck to the top of your life. So it has nothing to do with the first effect. The first effect lives completely separately from the second effect. You can do the second effect even without doing the first effect with some cards. It is a little bit confusing. Try to learn the rulings. Another one that beats people's ass is Sugar. Let's see. So, Sugar. Opponent's turn once per turn. When your opponent plays a character card, if your leader is the Don Quixote Pirates, rest up to one of your opponent's characters, then rest this card. So, number one, Sugar works even if she's already rested, because the rest effect comes at the end of your opponent having to rest a character. So, even if Sugar is already rested, it doesn't matter. Same thing with Enel effect. Enel effect is when your life hits 0, you may add the top card of your deck to your life, then you discard. So the effect goes off even if you don't have the secondary cost to pay, sort of. With Sugar's, it is resting herself. With Enel, it is trashing a card. Even if you have no cards in your hand to trash, Enel's effect still does work. So yeah, there's a lot of niche effects. I'm not a judge yet. I plan on being a judge. So this is going to be the best I'm going to help you guys out now. I don't want to give you any wrong information because things do get a little bit confusing at this point. But read your cards, understand the plays, understand what 2-cost Rosinante has effect on the Lucci and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, I'll give you one more just because I thought of it. So, and I know I'm right with this effect. So this Rosinante, it can protect as many characters as it applies to. As long as those characters are rested, it can protect all of them. The way I understand it is, in Japanese, they do not have a difference between singular and plural for the card game, so character is always implied as characters. Kind of like how moose means one moose or multiple moose. You know what I mean? So that is the confusion. This beats Buddy Battles judges' ass awfully so bad. I feel so bad for Buddy Battle judges because when it says opponents or opponent, it is almost always implying more than one because they don't have a difference between. Anyways, I'm getting too deep. This Rosinante can protect as many characters as applicable. Same thing with the Sabo leader. He can protect as many characters that would be KO'd at once. So if they 10-drop Kaido you, the one that KOs the whole board, you can just say Sabo effect, save every single one, and you're good. So understanding effects is very important, especially the more niche ones, especially if you're playing a little bit more of a tricky deck like Rosinante or something like that. So long explanation, but hopefully you guys got it. Okay, so this one is going to be playing to your outs. The best example of a deck of this is Red-Green Law because it basically has an answer to almost everything in the entire game. So for example, if they have a board flooded with blockers, this is your win condition. Do not let this card die, do not play it early, do not show it if you didn't search it, do not let it be known that you have this card in your hand. Don't get rid of it for any reason. Don't let it die, don't stick it out there early. I've lost so many games because I tried to play this a little bit too early so I could restand it the next turn, but if they just are able to KO it in one way or another before it gets the second attack off the next turn anyway, it doesn't matter. You're much better off saving it in your hand until you could play it down safely and then restand it with this card, for example. So this is going to be like not the longest explanation, but basically just if you need to get something done, do it the most efficiently way possible. So if you need to win this turn, and the only way for you to do that is by swinging 5 at their life and hoping they don't have 1k counter and there's 7 cards in their hand, you just gotta do it. Like, if you're gonna lose next turn anyways, don't sit on your hands, just go for the win. Like, more oftentimes than not, you'll get the win. I would say probably like 60%. Okay, the best way I can paraphrase this whole thing is try to win rather than trying not to lose. You need to try to win. That is the best example. that little mentality shift that I had for myself helped me win a lot more games. So hopefully that makes any sort of sense to you guys, and we're going to go on to the next one. Alright, so the next one is going to be momentum. Now, this comes in a few different ways, but I'll try to give the best examples I can. So, the biggest version I see is when, like, a Katakuri player plays a Brûlée with 3 Dawn. That is a nothing burger. It's probably going to get removed anyways. You would almost be better off just swinging with all your Dawn rather than playing a 3-cost blocker on turn 2. That is just so weak. You want to keep doing things that puts pressure on your opponent. So for example, if you're playing the Uda deck, you don't want to stick out that 3-cost blocker Uda early in the game, because she basically does nothing. I won't even play her until I've already got Luffy on the board and he's already able to attack. So I won't even play it with Luffy, because I would rather play Luffy, Brook, Usopp than Luffy, Brook, Uda. Like, it is way better, because Uda doesn't even get her effect off that same turn, and she could get KO'd the following turn. So you're much better off saving Uda in your hand. Actually, let's say my hand was Luffy, Brook, Zoro, Uda. I would actually much rather do Luffy into Zoro the first turn. Now, next turn, I can go Brook into Uda and restand my Luffy. That's much, much better. That's an example of how I was winning the Uda tournament. I would pick the bigger numbers first, and then since Brook can play Uda anyways, then following turn, I don't need to worry about getting that perfect combo off or whatever the case is. It works just as good playing the 7-4 and then a 4-3. So, don't know if that makes sense, but you want to preserve your momentum and keep the pressure on your opponent. Keep the pressure applied always as often as possible, because the second you let off the gas and give them room to breathe is typically where you're going to lose. Okay, this next one is going to be learn the yellow matchup for whatever your deck playing specifically at this time. So if you're going to play Enel, learn how to play against other yellow players. In my experience, Soul Focus works really, really well against yellow, especially, you know. But, yeah, counter build for yellow if you're planning on playing against them, or just learn the matchup. You're probably going to get Beji'd at the bottom if it's Katakuri. If they have one in their life, it's going to the bottom at the very beginning, and more than likely, there's a Beji sitting there at the end of the game. That is just part of the game. You need to be able to swing around it. Obviously, you can't always do that. Sometimes you're just gonna have one swing left, you know you have win guaranteed, and their last life is Beji and they stop you from attacking. That is just going to happen. You cannot stop it. Sometimes you get Enel down to 1 life, you're finally about to get rid of the life after the leader effect, and it's 200 million volts and they get 2 lives back. Does that feel awful? Yes. Is there something that you can do about it sometimes? Yes. We need better banish cards in this game for me to be able to say this more confidently, but you can definitely play around a lot of the yellow triggers by just not running face first into them. Sequencing is the most important thing when playing against yellow. You need to be swinging before playing your characters, that way you don't get hit by a Thunderbolt or Onami or anything else that could stop you from attacking. If you are intending to take a life, for example, like if your intention is to take a life from them that turn, swing with your highest number character first. So example, if I'm playing red purple Luffy and I have gear 5 on the field and just my leader, I will swing with my gear 5 first, just so I get the guaranteed life in the case that it's a Capone or Sanji or things such as. So, yeah, learn how to play around the yellow matchup. That's the best advice I can really give. It's not as unfair as a lot of people think. It definitely is unfair, though. We absolutely need more banish cards, so I'm very hopeful that they print some more of those. Going into sequencing, the best way I can describe this is by this general rule of thumb. Think of it as reverse Yu-Gi-Oh! So in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have a main phase where you deploy all of your characters, and then you have a battle phase where you attack, and then you have a secondary main phase. Not going to get into that part, doesn't matter. So, in One Piece, it's basically the opposite. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you want to attack before deploying your characters so that you can avoid any potential triggers that they would get, and or avoid any lost momentum. If you play a 5-cost character down and then you swing 5 and they hit a trigger Thunderbolt or something like that, you basically just lost. Like, you just lost so momentum, you basically just skipped your turn. So yeah, sequencing is one of the most important things. There are other examples. For example, like if you have a full board, you could swing 5 with your Kyros, right? Replace your Kyros with a Rebecca. Rebecca could now get the Kyros that you just trashed from the trash and play it again. That's an example that I just had off the top of my head. There are plenty of other examples of sequencing though, and it is easily probably the most important thing in the entire game. Losing your momentum because of a trigger that you didn't see coming and not recognizing it is a misplay and seeing it as luck is the biggest factor that held me back personally at the beginning of the game. I would always figure, oh, they hit a Thunderbolt, like that's so unlucky. No, I could have easily played around it and their Thunderbolt would have been useless in their hand had I just swung first and then played my character second. So this is not a end-all be-all. There is times where you don't want to do that, of course, but as a general rule of thumb, swing first, then play your characters, compartmentalize your turns into 2 different phases like that. So I've never really made a video like this, so if you guys liked it, please like and subscribe. It took quite a little bit more effort than my usual videos to make, so let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed anything. I'm sure I did miss 1 or 2 important things. So yeah, let me know how I did and what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe. See ya.